Welcome to Research Party, where we review books aimed at teachers that may or may not claim to be evidence-based, whatever that is.
I'm Darren and this is Lucy, and we're here to crash the party that every education book seems to be throwing these days. You know, the research-based, evidence-informed, scientifically proven stuff that promises to revolutionise your classroom.
That's right. We are like those party guests who actually read the fine print on the invitation while everyone else is dancing to the latest edu trend. We're in the corner checking if the DJ actually knows who public service broadcasting is. I still don't know who they are.
Each episode, we pick apart a book that claims to have the research receipts and ask whether some of these receipts are more like shopping lists on the back of an envelope.
We'll dig into the studies, poke apart the claims, and ask the burning question: is this actually evidence-based or just sort of evidence adjacent?
And most importantly, should you spend your precious teacher time reading this, or would you be better off marking those books that have been in the boot of your car all weekend?
So grab your highlighters, pour yourself something delicious, and join us as we separate the research, that's hard to say, the research wheat from the pedagogical chaff. There you go.
Yeah. Let's get this party started. You didn't come in when I did.
I know. I wanted you to have to say it on your own because you hate saying it. Okay, sorry, guys. That was really mean of me. If you have tuned into this not wanting to hear me be mean to Darren, I would just leave now.
Good luck.
Yeah. So today we are reviewing. Let's see if I can read this. Oh, wait, it's you reading it. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to do this bit.
Go ahead.
This is getting less slick possibly than when we did a canned introduction last time.
Great. So authentic.
Yeah. Okay. Today we're reviewing Seeing the Math You Teach, Grades K to 6, an elementary teacher's quick guide to meaningful mathematical strategies and representations. And I'm delighted I managed to get that bit of alliteration out, by Kimberly Rimbey, Katie S. Shattuck Basham, and Chryste Berda.
Now, this is important. Shall I tell you why? Firstly, this is a book, I believe, by non-men. Happy to be corrected on that. Very excited. I mean, it makes my heart a flutter. A mathematical book by non-men always makes me reach for my highlighter. I'm always excited about it. But secondly, this is hot off the press. In fact, you may have realised that Darren doesn't have a copy because it's really hot off the press. It's just been published. And someone was really organised and ordered it on time, and someone wasn't. And, you know, I'll just let you draw your own conclusions about that.
Now.
No, you have no right of reply.
I need to cut in just a tiny bit here. Initially, organisation, definitely an issue. Not going to argue that. I was trying because it seemed a sensible thing to see if I could get an inspection copy from the publisher for this, and they were incredibly helpful and said they would send one, but we've never managed to organise it ahead of needing to read it for the record.
Did we need to know that? I don't think we did. Okay, let's move on. Now, I'm going to read the blurb because one thing that we have thought about as we've been doing these reviews is perhaps we told you less about the book at the beginning than we should. So let's remedy that. One of the things that's interesting about this book is we're already making connections with previous reviews. So this has been endorsed, let's say, by Peter Lilladal, which is interesting. And at least one of the authors has a strong connection with Peter. So Peter said nice things about it on the back of the book. And from the blurb, the sort of main message is because when you see the math, they can see it too. And I will read you the blurb so you get a sense of what this book's trying to achieve. The role of today's classroom teacher has evolved from being a disseminator of information to a facilitator of learning. Nice. As an elementary teacher, you can guide student thinking to deeper levels of understanding by making connections between and among physical, visual, symbolic, verbal, and contextual representations. Lucy's so on board right now, she's driving the train. Seeing the Math You Teach, Grades K to 6, is intended to help you help your students. It is an accessible guide for elementary teachers that focuses on making mathematics meaningful, through multiple strategies and representations to help foster a love for mathematics. We're not even just trying to teach it at this point. We're trying to help students see how great it is in their students. The authors have written this book based on the deep belief that everyone can be good at maths. It illustrates the most commonly seen and used visual models of each of the elementary mathematical content areas the way children think about them. I'm not sure about that claim. That's interesting. Rather than a book full of prescribed problem-solving strategies, this book will help you and your students literally see the structure of mathematical concepts, how and why they work, and make connections among various representations and topics. This is not the kind of book to be read cover to cover. It's organised in a flexible format. Flexible in two ways. Dun, 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 dun. And spiral bound.
Spiral bound.
Spiral bound. I'm so excited about that. Enhancing teachers' own clarity and understanding in maths, or in other words, to see the math they teach. And then there's a bit more. It's about meaning, sense, and joy. Okay, so I promise you this was chosen at random, because you might be forgiven for thinking that I deliberately chose this book because it ticks all of my boxes about things that I love about maths education, but I didn't. Ready? What are you drinking? What are you thinking? Let's bring it back.
Yeah. I mean, as is, I guess, tradition. Can you say something's traditional when you've done 4 recordings of a thing and 4 times? But as is traditional.
Hold on, that's the same question as how many numbers do we need to make a pattern, isn't it? And we've conclusively proved in maths the answer is both 2 and infinitely numbers. So
many.
Whatever you look at.
Yeah, so I mean, as is traditional,
Yes.
I'm drinking a cup of tea, partly because the weather's turned and it's really cold in my house at the moment. So I'm not just drinking my cup of tea, I'm huddled around my cup of tea for a little bit of extra warmth. In terms of thinking, I'm contemplating the way that this discussion is going to go, given the rapturous enthusiasm of the introduction.
Oh, don't worry, I've got plenty of critique.
And the thing with this book, I'm just thinking about like it's so, when you read that blurb, it's so well aligned, I think, with what both of us think about maths and maths education and kind of our goals as maths educators. And I'm just thinking about my initial picking up that book and hoping that it lived up to the kind of really high standards it's setting itself.
Yes,
right
if I
from the
may,
start.
it was much like opening a Christmas present in the early 1990s, hoping, in my case, that it was a Mr. Frosty. Do I mean Mr. Frosty? That's what I mean.
You don't mean a Barbie doll, right?
I don't mean that. No, I was hoping and hoping for a Mr. Frosty many years. Something like that. What was the gift that you most hoped to unwrap in that early childhood era?
Oh, that's an excellent question. I mean, mine's sort of chopped about all the time. I was very much led by whatever the latest craze was.
Is that
because
because you got what you wanted every year? No, okay,
never
did.
Never did.
Oh, wow. Okay, well let's move on. That was a great insight into both of our childhoods. I've brought you something that you might enjoy.
Go on. Ooh.
Right now, great noise. This is Lucy in mug form. It's absolutely all style and no substance.
Dark and sharp edges.
Correct. Right, you can't. It's sort of faceted. It's very nice. It's a beautiful mug that I absolutely adore. That is almost
Sorry, are you
impossible.
describing yourself as a beautiful mug?
No, I mean you just did.
I might.
It's a beautiful mug that I absolutely adore. Gorgeously made. Like you can't necessarily see the glaze on it, but it's this sort of deep, rich cobalt purple. Almost impossible to drink out of. Doesn't function very well as a mug, partly because the handle is interesting. Anyway, so
yes, and I assume the liquid inside could go in all sorts of directions based on those angles.
No, it's got a good lip to drink. That's okay, but it's more of the sort of the holding and the slightly unusual scent. But anyway, this is what I'm drinking. I'm drinking today cherry Dr. Pepper, which is my daughter's favourite, and so I'm drinking in honour of her because we're celebrating some excellent GCSE results, those people who were paying attention. And what I'm thinking is, as you said, this was a lot to promise, and the blurb suggests it's very well aligned with our thoughts. Largely, no spoilers here, largely it delivers. I do have some critiques, and I would be really interested to get into them with you and see if you share them. But I have some, let's just put this into context. I have some critiques in the context of this is a great book. Definitely my favourite that we've reviewed so far, and absolutely excellent for teachers.
Yes.
Is, you know, the point.
Yeah,
Right?
I think that's one of the ones that I thought, looking at it, like particularly a non-specialist teacher
Oh yeah.
who is teaching maths to students and kind of trying to go back over their own maths education and think about how they translate this into understanding that they can present in front of teachers. And again, I mean, I have definitely some critiques of sections of the book and way certain mathematics is presented, but if you are doing this, you know, first time early career maths teachers, non-specialist maths teachers, teachers that haven't had that opportunity to really reflect on stuff, then actually all of the critiques I have are kind of really second order compared to the comprehensiveness of this as a great starting point and a really great way just to kind of give a foundation and to fill in a load of blanks that you might have, or allow you to structure your thinking about mathematics for those topics that you just haven't taught before or had the chance to think about in any great detail.
Two responses to that. One is, yes, second order critiques. Top line, this is great. And I don't know about you, but I was a very conscientious student at school. And so I used to get really annoyed when I would go to parents' evening or receive a report and the teachers would say something like, yeah, she's amazing, but, and then they'd launch into their critique. And I'd feel really hard done by, because actually the critique and the feedback was the part that we all needed to concentrate on, and that's what we're there for. But it felt like that was skimmed over. So I've definitely been guilty of doing that on this show in the past.
Yes,
so
yeah.
I agree with you. I don't want to focus too much on the critique as the only thing. It's a great book. And then the second response I have to that is interesting, because you said you thought this book would be good for early career teachers or perhaps those who were non-specialist. And I take the opposite view. I think it's not that those people won't necessarily find anything good in this book. I think they will. But actually, for me, the main audience of this book is people who want a richer, deeper understanding of mathematics. And I'll tell you what, this was hard for me to read. There were multiple times during this reading that I had to stop. I had to make a sketch or a diagram. I had to think about what I'd read. I had to reevaluate my understanding of the mathematics, because it engages with sense making in a way that I found actually quite at times confronting to my own understanding of maths. And oh my God, I loved it. But that's, I mean, I think there's something for everyone, but I do think if you're somebody who's been teaching maths for a long time, maybe this is really great for you.
So it's interesting because I sort of have a reaction to that in terms of how my big critique of this, which I don't want to kind of go into too detailed this early in things.
Save it.
But I think for me, like, first of all, again, we had this conversation last month with Sue Cowley's book of whether we were reading it wrong. Now, one of the things that this book says right at the start is this isn't a book, you read it in the blurb, this isn't a book to read from cover to cover. Now, I suspect you, in the same way as I did, maybe didn't read it cover to cover, but were reading chunks at a time.
I read it backwards, actually.
Whereas I think the intention... So we'll come to that. We'll definitely talk about that. The teacher that picks this up because they have a thing that they need to teach, and they look at that page or that couple of pages and think about it in context of a particular problem. I don't think that that sort of issue of it being overwhelm or make challenging thinking would be an issue in quite the same way. But yeah, and I think the critique I would have from more experienced teachers, certainly later in the book, is that the further you go through the book, the less seeing the maths I felt there was in the book, and to a point where it became a bit more routine and a bit more standard. And we'll talk about that a little bit more, I'm sure. I think the first half of the book absolutely does what it says that it's setting out to do, and does have that challenge of thinking that you talked about.
Wow. Okay. So we're asking ourselves, as we always do, whether it claims to be research-based. What are your thoughts?
Well, so I don't think it, as far as I can see, it doesn't make any direct claim to be research-based. However, having read an awful lot of educational research and then seeing what's in the book, again, particularly around number and the introduction of number, the structure of number, and that kind of thing, I can see the research informedness of the book in the way that information was presented. Now, I suspect that a lot of this is about evidence informed, and it's about a teacher that's been around a research community and has absorbed those ideas. I don't know whether they're making claims to have taken that, 3 teachers. I don't know whether they're making claims to have taken this stuff directly from research, but it is definitely informed by research being in their orbit, or them being in the orbit of research informed approaches.
Yes, and we should note it's not even being in the orbit of. I mean, certainly the first author on this is more well qualified than either you or I.
Yeah.
By some distance. And so here's my thought. I will go stronger in terms of the claims, in terms of what you just said. This book isn't just a bit evidence informed. I think this book is one of the most well aligned books with the maths education research that I've ever read. I was powerfully impacted with the alignment. Now, I understand you're a statistics education specialist, but you also have read lots of things around other topics. I am more of a generalist. And so for me, there's a really good, consistent application of research evidence throughout this book. In a way, I see you're about to disagree with me and I want to hear it, but in a way that really impressed me. However, I am puzzled by the fact that there is no claim that this book is informed by evidence, because it really is, from what I can tell.
And I think it's one of those. I mean, I guess it's the thing from our point of view as researchers, as part of our identities. Like we want to see those claims to research directly and evidence, because for us it makes the claim stronger. I guess if you're a teacher audience, maybe it's not changing how you read the book. It's just full of good ideas and well explained, well structured stuff. So the authors maybe felt like putting citations and things in might be more of a barrier than a thing that engages and has credibility.
I wonder about that, because the questions that I asked, I mean, it's not a spectrum, right? It isn't put a load of research backed stuff and citation in the book or don't.
Right.
There's lots of space in between to do so in a way that's accessible and clear and helpful. But my question is therefore about the currency of being research informed, and has that shifted now, perhaps in the US where this book is or has been written, to an extent where things are changing? Because it's really noticeable in this book. For example, I'll give you an example. At the beginning of the book, there's quite the focus on the sort of idea of moving from what people might recognize as concrete pictorial abstract, otherwise known as concrete representational abstract, or if you go all the way back to Brunner, the idea of inactive iconic symbolic. So these are the same sorts of ideas. You start with a physical manipulative and you play with it. It's a very strong introduction, that really, really grounds maths teaching in this approach. You start with physical objects, you move towards abstracting that by drawing images, icons, symbols, pictures that still bear some resemblance to the original object. And then you are able to further abstract and start to manipulate symbolically mathematical communication in a way that is so far from the original object that actually to some degree it's unrecognizable, but it doesn't matter, because that's the best and maybe most concise way of communicating things mathematically. And that idea is so well evidenced in research now, and other forms of evidence, that it does seem a strange omission not to talk about where it comes from, and that we've been doing it in maths classrooms really successfully for 80 years. I mean, it's one of the things that hasn't really changed much in maths, I don't think. And I'm not saying that people do it everywhere, but where they have done it successfully and continue to do so, it's been a really well proven approach. And so to me, it's a very odd thing not to mention where that comes from.
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't disagree. I wonder if one of the other issues or one of the other reasons behind it is perhaps about integrity and consistency. Because I think so. One of the things where I guess I would disagree a little bit with what you said already is I think there is some stuff that is really well aligned to the research I've read. I'm not sure that was consistent through every part of the book, and there are particular bits where I think there's a whole load of research that says different things, or there's things from research that were not included, and I think we're
Well,
getting
two different things, right?
specifics.
Contradiction or omission. Contradiction's the
Right.
stronger issue. Can you give me any examples of that?
So, I mean, again, we're slightly stepping on toes, but one of the things that I was contemplating as a thing that you potentially hated was the way algebra was dealt with in this book. Because for me, there was a kind of a rush to symbolic algebra in that section. There was lots of, well presented stuff about how to do different techniques and processes within that sort of symbolic algebra manipulation. There was a lovely introduction page that said all the right things ahead of the examples, but actually within the examples, it was dominated by that abstract algebra processes and not focused on things like equality, symbol sense, structure.
Well, a strong critique of your critique coming up. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's fine. But that for me was a place where I thought there was a lot of the pre-algebra stuff was felt like more of a footnote in that section ahead of the actual, curriculum content that we might traditionally see, which
Agree.
didn't align as well as I would expect to research.
Well, okay, so I agree with the first critique that the pre-algebra was missing from the section on algebra. However, there is a pre-algebra section. It's chapter 2.
Yeah.
And all of what you just mentioned is in chapter 2. So chapter 2 is called Math, Symbols and Properties. And it is a bit of a shame to me it's not called symbol sense, because it absolutely did focus on symbol sense. And that idea of equality and the sort of trichotomy property of things can be essentially bigger, smaller, or the same actually was very well handled in there. I do agree with some of the critique that there's such a tension between wanting to represent ideas conceptually and having a limited amount of space in which to also have to organize knowledge graphically.
Right.
And so there's definitely a sort of list of, at the beginning of each chapter, and I don't think it should go at the beginning, but a sort of list of all the things you need to know about this, which feels like it runs counter to that. I do agree with that. But I actually didn't hate the way it handled algebra, certainly not any more than I hate most things of the way they handle algebra.
Right.
I thought that chapter 2 introduction to properties was quite well done. Later on, I agree. The last section on algebra was kind of as you would expect, and nothing particularly great, but also nothing particularly terrible from my point of view. But it was consistent with the research, which suggests that this move from arithmetic to algebra is the thing, and to start off with number sentences and to fill thinking about equality and statements of equality, and there wasn't a particular reference to the use of the equals sign in the way that perhaps I would have liked. But other than that, I thought it was quite well focused on the right things.
But I think what I want is that linking between, like, I want that trajectory between the two, because it feels to me, and particularly when you say this is a book that you're dipping into, you're not reading it cover to cover, you're coming to it for a specific problem. When I'm going, so again, thinking about that teacher that is, newly qualified or non-specialist, when I go to the algebra chapter to find some assistance, I need that signpost that says all of the stuff in chapter 2 is the preamble, or that makes that connection, that has that trajectory, so that I don't go in and go, now I'm doing algebra. I go, what I need to do is recap on the chapter 2 stuff and bring that through and develop it.
Yes.
And that's where it then feels not aligned to research, because that can, even if they're in the book, they're not connected.
Yes, I think
I
take that.
Usable.
I think I take
or
that.
Obvious to the non-specialist. You have to know that before you can make that connection.
I was just looking to see if the authors had color coded the two the same, and they hadn't, which is a shame. I think it's a missed opportunity.
Shall we should we push on, because we're starting to get into some of the detailed critiques,
Yes.
and there are things that are coming out of this that I think are the what we
Yes.
loved, what we hated.
I'm just going to put a pin in whether we consider this to be research
Yeah.
based and why I think the authors might not have done, because there's a point I want to pick up on, but I'm going to come to that at the end if we have time.
Great. Okay. Shall we do some things we loved?
Well, now you've already told me what you thought I hated and you were wrong, so I'm going to give you another shot at that after this. But do you want to see if you can? I'm not even going to use the word guess, because I don't know how difficult this is. What do you think I loved about this book?
So, I mean, you've already said we've already done one of the things that I had actually, which is Spiral Bound.
Spiral Bound.
I knew
Correct.
you'd appreciate
Tick.
that.
Loved it.
Now, again, some really obvious things that I would consider Lucyisms and things that are design principles you use in your work that I recognise throughout this book, and I'm sure you appreciate. So, first of all, tons of pictures. I mean, it's called Seeing the Maths You Teach. Of course, it's got lots of diagrams and pictures and things, and I know you love that stuff. I thought you would appreciate the use of color coding to connect diagrams and sentences, with one small caveat that will come to you later.
Oh, you've absolutely hit the post, Macy. So hard. Continue.
And also, yeah, the language throughout was very simple and accessible and easily readable. Knew you'd like that. The use of kind of thought bubbles and dialogic devices at various points through the book to emphasize what people are thinking and saying. Again, things that I've seen you do and I know that you enjoy.
Thank you. And I think I've put the focus on representations rather than pictures.
Yeah.
And they are, you know, I think it could be accused of me that I just like to draw pictures, which is absolutely true, but I like good pictures. I like good representations. And so this book helped me to challenge that, because there are some actually very bad images in here. Not many, but there's a lot of stick people in here, which what's the point? But on the whole, the focus on representations, loads of different representations and functionally equivalent representations. You're right. I absolutely loved it. And I'm thrilled that this book exists. And there were times when that shone. I mean, I'm thinking of ratio. The handling of ratio in here is lovely. A really traditionally difficult topic. You know, some of the ways that the authors offer these different representations to student and teacher and just invite them to see what's going on in the maths through lots of different lenses is just beautiful. I can't overstate it. This is the stuff I've been reading about in research for a very long time, and it's lovely to see it there. The reason I'm horrified that you think I like the color coding in this book is it's disgusting. I'm sorry, authors. Let me try again. It's not disgusting. It's upsetting to me. It's really inconsistent. There are times when colour is used in a coded way, and there's many times when it's used extremely haphazardly. And it's one of those things, if you don't do it all the time, why do it? And so it's, as I just said, for example, you've got chapters that are super related to one another. They're almost like the beginning of this topic and the maturation of this topic that aren't color coded the same color. You've got representations where the same idea is being represented in 4 different ways, and they have not used color coding to show the same features on all of the diagrams, which is such a missed trick. It's really, there's so many times when I looked at a diagram, loved it, looked closer and thought, those colors don't make any sense. There's just no logic to the underlying structure of the colour in maybe about half of the diagrams. Some of them there is, and it's infuriating to me.
So essentially what you're saying is that you're far too fussy.
I don't think I'm fussy enough. I think if you're gonna use colour, use it properly, and it should be used to illuminate, not just to colour in and look pretty. You know, if you're using red over here to show me a ratio where 2 quantities are divided, don't use red over here for the first quantity, because what's the point of that?
But I think I mean, I take your point that where it's meaningful, it then is potentially obscuring in the places where it's not meaningful. But there were some really nice uses of it where the structure of a, some mathematical notation alongside some kind of diagram structure,
Agree.
where the parts of the notation were color coded to match where that information came from on the diagram, which I thought was really useful and did aid clarity. And I thought you'd like more.
I like it where it's done well.
Yeah.
I think there's been a bit of a lack of attention to the diagrams in general, in the kind of detail I would like, which I hope that when this comes out in second edition, that more attention will be paid to.
Yeah.
So I will absolutely give you 1 point.
I have some points, but not all the points.
Yeah.
All
would
right.
you like me to go?
I would.
All right. So I mentioned that I read this book backwards, and that's because one thing that I found, I'm not going to say disappointing, I just find it a little mundane, is the way this book was structured in terms of order. And we've spoken about, dipping in and out. The way this book is structured in terms of order is predictable and irritatingly predictable, and putting myself in your shoes, as I often do, and filling them out beautifully. It is sad that data is left to the very end. I always find it sad that we feel like statistics and data just sometimes feels this kind of optional add-on when it's so important and brings so many topics together. Okay, hold on. So I read this backwards on purpose. When I saw the ordering, I thought I'm going to start with data. And I think something that you loved about this book, and I imagine you have conflicting thoughts about data, because there were things here that I knew that would bother you, but on the whole, I think it handles data well. And I think on the whole, it describes data literacy really well. So I'm going to read the sentence that I think perhaps encapsulates the way the authors feel about data, other than relegating it to the back of the book, which we don't like, that I think you may have enjoyed. It says, as students develop data literacy, already I like that they're using this phrase, they come to understand that the same set of data can tell multiple stories, beautiful, and it's in their best interest to become flexible in reading these data stories. Student experiences in data should be explored, again, nice word, through rich and meaningful contexts that are that are relevant to the students and their communities. I think that's how you feel about data on the whole. Let's see if I'm right.
Yes. Now, so it's really interesting that you said you read this backwards, because you were thinking about my statistical proclivities. I looked at the chapter headings at the start, and I saw that data was at the very end of the chapter, and I read the book with an increasingly sense of trepidation about what I would find in that final chapter. Firstly, because the first half of the book was, as I said, absolutely was great, and I was thinking, oh, if it does data in the same way as all of this pictographic representation of things, like, I'm going to be so happy. And then we got into the kind of the middle to later part of the book, where I felt it got much more. There's a point where I just wrote, this is bog standard now, like really nicely presented, but it had just become like, these are sort of the example pages from textbooks, but nicely presented and nicely structured and well annotated. And so then I was starting to get a little bit of fear of, like, are we going to get to the data chapter and it's just going to be the standard stuff that I hate? And got to that final chapter and read the introductory text for that chapter. Should say the introductory text to all the chapters is excellent. You mentioned ratio already. The ratio chapter specifically mentioned proportional reasoning. Again, another thing where you start to go, well, there's some research around this, because that is a very researchy informed kind of term. But the data introduction, I read it and I was like, oh, I've written this introductory paragraph in so many papers. Let me read it out very quickly. In the real world, understanding data has always been important for making informed decisions, but recently the significance of understanding data has increased exponentially. I have written so many versions of that sentence as the introduction to papers, and everyone else in stats education has been doing the same thing. So, okay, warm fuzzy feeling. This is going good. This is great. I love it. I have more reservations, I think, about the content of that chapter than
Yeah.
perhaps
As do I.
you've anticipated. But the
Hang
presentation
on.
of it,
I didn't say I thought you loved the chapter.
no,
I said I thought you would love that conception of data literacy very
and I did,
specifically.
and I think the wrapper around the content
Yes.
is exactly what I would like to
The
see.
wrapping paper, we can continue with our Christmas analogy.
Which I think we can go to in the
honourable
in
mention.
section.
It's got dot plots in it.
It does.
We like that.
We do like dot plots. I mean,
Great.
I will say, this is one where, yes, I like the fact there were dot plots. It is a US-based book. They are much more used representations in the US context than in the UK. So it's something that I've been trying to encourage whenever I speak to UK-based teachers, the dot plot as a really useful teaching tool. But it's not. It is more commonly used in the US.
Put the reins back on the horse. Climb off. Let's proceed.
Would you like to hear some other things that I love that you have not picked up?
I would.
So I really liked this technique that was used throughout, where they got into the word problems, where they named the different types of word problems. I do have some reservations about this sort of categorization of problems in the way that that can become very procedural as an interpretation tool, but as a way to support explanation and communication, being able to actually name those different types, I thought was a lovely device that was used throughout. And also in the multiplication division chapter, where they presented those named problems as an array to highlight the connection between the multiplication and the division version of the same type of problem. I thought was lovely.
Do you want to just explain what you mean by categorizing types of problem? Because it's not immediately clear what that means.
Well, if you have your book and you hold up page 111, I think, you might be able to show it.
Yes.
Yeah, so we have the multiplication division type, but then the specific names for the types of problem they've got. Compare arrays of objects and equal groups of objects, and what that looks like in a multiplication context, what that looks like in a division context. I just thought it was a really nice device to draw attention to similarities and differences.
Yeah.
Yes, and histograms kept simple. That was another thing that I like. Again, very much a US-UK difference, that we do histograms of frequency density. We have different widths, class widths, and it makes histograms very complicated. And actually, if you just have equal class widths, use frequency, you can do all that work on continuous distributions and the shape of them without all of this extra technical complexity, which is something we should do much more of, because histograms are great.
Well, I'm interested that we've never had this conversation, and I'm asking myself why, because I've got a confession for you. Now, I've been rewatching Educating Essex, which I've been rewatching lots of those shows, which if you're not in the UK, it's a sort of documentary filmed in schools. And this happened at the time I was teaching in Essex, so I was in a school really similar to this one. And there's a classic moment in that where a young lady who's about 15 at the back of the class just completely reaches the end of her tether and just goes, "What is pi? Where does it come from?" And it's like her whole brain explodes. And that's how I feel about histograms. I just cannot see the point of a history. We need to have this conversation in great detail. We'll record it and you can explain to me why histograms exist. Anyway, should we move on to things that we think the other person hated?
We should.
Yeah.
Okay.
Would you like to go first?
Sure, why not? Okay, I think so. I've said already, I don't think you were keen on the algebra section, so we've already kind of come that, and maybe a bit of a swing and a miss, although, you know, close to the ball. There was one thing I put within, and again, it was a page of the algebra section, so there was a whole page of effectively definitions of different words.
Yes.
And my note on that is, this is just a pretty list of terms.
Yes. And you did claim at the beginning that you thought I loved the accessible, useful language it was written in. And my slight counter to that is I would say 70% of this book is written in lovely, clear, useful language that's quite derived from academic research. So that's a really impressive feat. However, there are a number of terms that are used in this book that I absolutely don't think we need to use and unnecessarily complicate things. But that's a real side point for me.
Yeah.
And yeah, the sort of procedural, here's an organization of all the knowledge you might need. It's an interesting way to do things, and I understand the balance because it can't be all conceptual all the time, but that isn't a thing that I specifically hated.
Okay. There was a bunch of red-green color coding, which I thought you would probably notice.
Because
not great for people with visual impediments, color blindness, that kind
that's
of thing.
reason one. Reason two is we are coded, certainly in the Western world, to think green good, red bad, and so it can give some messaging that might be difficult. Yes.
And then I'll be interested to know if you spotted this one. I'm almost certain you did. But page 126, example of problem questions, boys and their balls.
Well done. I have put the thing that really wound me up the most, and I put not hated exactly, I just wanted it to be better.
Yeah.
The book claims to be grounded in real world examples. And I think the choice of examples in this book throughout didn't feel interesting, didn't feel fun, didn't feel authentic, and didn't feel equitable. And that's my substantive criticism of the whole book. Boys and girls agree. It happens a couple of times, just lazy. There's no excuse for it anymore. Stop doing it. There are a number of examples in here where I keep coming back to this. If you're going to use a context, where's the motivation? Oh, I'm back to me being a thespian, aren't I? But
also exactly the stats critique I would have.
Right, exactly this of I honestly think I don't know that I came across a single example where I thought, oh, what a lovely question. They were just there. It was bunnies on a hill. It was birds on a branch. It was boys in their balls, which, let's face it, there's enough of them in the world. And I actually started thinking about this word authentic and what that means, because, this is a big debate in the maths education community. Can you even have authentic problems? What does that look like? Are tasks going to be by their nature artificial because we're in this artificial math classroom and we have to abstract? And so the common sense, interesting things about modeling problems that you and I would recognize, we maybe do have to strip away a bit for students to first come into contact with just the mathematics. I don't agree with that view, but it is a view that is put forward. And so I thought about this, and I read a bit more about authenticity of tasks. And here's the critique that I have that another researcher has put forward, and I'll quote them. So this is from a researcher writing in 2018 called Voss, who's Norwegian. Rather than learning that mathematics is about reasoning, creativity, and collaboration, and that mathematics is useful for solving authentic real-life problems, imprinting practice makes students learn that maths is for inauthentic situations, that mathematical tasks contain artificial complexities like the sum of legs of animals, that mathematical problems have one and only one answer, which is often in this book, that the answer in mathematics is always a number and not a range of answers, that an estimate or an essay containing reasoning, not an estimate, and that there is just one algebraic approach to solve the problem. Now, I don't think this book does all of those things, but it does some of them, and that's my problem with it.
Yeah, and I think
you're correct.
It's taken us 4 episodes, but I finally got to the point where I'm getting good at predicting you.
Congratulations.
I think this is one of the things. I mean, look, context is difficult, right? And you have that extra thing where actually, if you do start to move into more, let's say, interesting for the sake of argument context, you probably have a higher burden of explaining that context and setting the scene of it, which in a book which is focusing on getting to these images and pictures and structures as quickly as possible might actually kind of get in the way of that. And so there's definitely a tension there. I completely agree. Like the contexts were mid at best.
Oh, he's gone all Gen Z on me.
I have.
Low key, they were mid at best.
Yeah. But I wasn't too bothered by that, statistics chapter accepted. Mainly because to some extent, okay, if this is if I think of this as like a ready reference for teachers, so long as they are bringing context that are relevant, interesting to their classes, that's fine. Now, whether people have the time, people need that modeled, and you can argue that actually seeing a model of more interesting context is really important as well. So I think I can see this one from both ends.
As you're saying interesting, I'm thinking more about creative, fun, motivating.
Yeah.
And I see the problem as well, because, we don't want all of our lessons to be about TikTok. Right. Or the Trump administration. I understand that keeping things realistic, current, meaningful to students is a real challenge, and quite often results in things that are just as inauthentic, just differently inauthentic.
In a different way.
Right. I agree with that. Yes. I come back to this idea that we have an opportunity to break the cycle always in a number of ways. And one of them is this reaching for the same examples question.
Right.
And I think it stifles creativity, because once you see it done well, you think, oh yeah, right, I've got it now. But you have to see some of that in front of you.
Right. And there's a way you can do this where you have an extra page in every section, which is a creative, fun, whatever, pick word to describe the type of context we're talking about, that says, like, here's some standard simple examples that are fairly universal, again in scare quotes for that, but that just get us to the bit of maths that you're trying to communicate. And here's an example of what it can look like in a different wrapper, in a more engaging wrapper and things.
Darren Macy, soon to be Dr. Darren Macy. Speaking of this word universal, how often have you counted bunnies on a hill?
Look, when I say universal, it was heavily caveated.
I, for one, have never counted bunnies on a hill, and I love bunnies and hills.
Sure.
I have a few more things I hated, if that's okay.
Go for it. Yeah.
Right. Small thing, but not small to me. Use of the word natural. Now, regular viewers...
This is like appropriate for you, right?
Oh, regular viewers may have picked up on this. The word natural is often used in ways that I find counter to my values. Not always, right? And what natural is often used to do, there's two things. One is to suggest that some things are inherent, and those things are definitely not inherent. I mean, my daughter has a natural artistic talent, gets told to me multiple times. She doesn't. She works extremely hard, and she notices things, and she was brought up in an environment where she was encouraged and praised for being good at art. The word natural does her a disservice, and I dislike it. The other time it's used is as a counter to things like artificial or synthetic or person-made, stuff like that, and it's used with absolutely no precision, and so almost never is that word used well. I'm surprised the word is used in this book. It's interesting because it says, for example, mathematics evolves naturally. Not the most heinous thing to say, but what do you mean? Students come to school with a natural sense of quantity. Also, I think you could explain that better using different words, but this is the one that really bothered me. Subtraction is as unnatural as addition is natural. I mean, I'm not sure what I'm supposed to take from that. Animals do subtraction all the time. I think there's a part of me coming from the queer community that feels that heavy weight of that as an insult. It's not natural to be queer. Animals are queer, folks. What does that mean? And so I think in one's nature, to suggest that subtraction is an unnatural way of thinking about maths, and yet also in the same breath that students have a natural sense of quantity and maths evolved naturally, I think there's a huge contradiction there. And I'm going to come back to that word natural at the end when I talk about, again, my final point, if I can. But this is really a small amount of critique from me, I think, because I liked this book.
Yeah. It's interesting the difference between or the use of unnatural to mean counterintuitive rather than unnatural. Yeah.
What did you hate? Oh, I need to guess what you hated. Okay, ready?
Yes.
Whew. There were many things in the stats chapter, and you have sort of told me this already, but I promise you I wrote it down,
Yeah.
that were not as visual as one would hope.
Mm.
And in particular, a real example of a thing that pushes all of your buttons, a decontextualized data set.
Mm-hmm.
Dun, dun, dun. So page 191. And so I don't think that data literacy lived up to the promise in the introduction to the section, and I think there were it was mid, or we're saying it again, I think it was a sort of, it was okay. I think the authors haven't, I was about to say they haven't given as much thought to representations of data literacy as you have. I'm not surprised, it's your life's work at this point. But yes, that's what I've written. And there's one other, I found a thing that I wondered if you'd notice before you said to me, and I had noticed it. Let's see if you've noticed it. It infuriated me, and I thought it might bother you even more, that there's a whole section on rounding, and they give some lovely visuals of rounding to the nearest and a sort of balanced number line model, and they never ever deal with the issue of 5 at the end. Not once.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
I
didn't notice that. I was enjoying the fact, because that particular approach to setting rounding, it's not earth-shattering, but that was something that I always used.
I'm sorry, you just said a lot of things, none of which I caught. Try again.
So I enjoyed that approach to rounding that they did of using the number line and bracketing, and that was something that I relied on when I was teaching those kind of things, like getting students. You famously not a person who draws diagrams for things, but that was somewhere where I always used diagrams because it was just so much more effective with the classes that I was teaching. I didn't notice the lack of focus on 5. That's interesting. To go back to the data stuff, just so infuriated by this chapter, because
saw the steam come out furious.
Because like the introduction's amazing. I'm completely on board with it. The individual sections, to some extent, like there's a little sentence which says all the right things. There's a page that's specifically about variability. I
know.
There's so much good stuff in there, which again, it's that thing of, this is coming from research. Like, this is all straight out of research of what's important. And then the presentation of the content was just like really bog standard. Like, here's some graphs, very nicely drawn graphs, very well annotated, drawing attention to all the right things. But one of the things that's super important about, like, even if you just say, like, we're going to focus on interpreting graphs in this chapter, because I think that's one of the issues. It was all reading data from graphs. It wasn't reading beyond the data. It wasn't interpreting graphs. It was just, how do you pull information out of them? But even if you say that's what this chapter was trying to do, because it couldn't possibly do the broader things, and in context of the kind of book it is, it wasn't, it was a maths focused book, whatever that means. It wasn't looking at graphical signifiers, which is something that I talk about a lot, and again comes out of research, but the concept of frequency being represented by length or by a count in a thing about diagrammatic representations of maths, like, I expect that to be there, and I think it's reasonable to say that I expect that to be there. Like, this is about interpreting diagrams, and if you just have the graphs there with pretty annotations, but you don't focus in on what is being signified by the different components, it was just nice examples from textbook chapters. And I have the same critique of it as I have in the textbook chapters. I think the mean, median, mode were all in one space, again, very much counter to research, all with small data sets, and without using pictures to explain it. Like, there was no balance model for mean or fair sharing model for mean, which could have been done by a lovely picture. And based on what was in the number chapters, like, that kind of approach, like, it was crying out for, like, you can do it here, do it in my data chapter.
Yes.
The median was a list of numbers with the crossed off to get to the middle. Again, like, that could have been a picture, Yeah, there's so many ways that that could be done. And so, yeah, it was really frustrating because it sort of tiptoed up to the edge, and then it just went back to all the things that we see in
Yes.
traditional stuff. And it just made me sad.
So,
Just
authors
made
of
me
this
sad.
book, I need to thank you, because what you've done is made an argument that I've been trying to make to Darren for about 10 years superbly, very eloquently. Darren is crying out for more diagrams now. Thank you very much.
But
And
to do your thing, not just more diagrams, good
better.
diagrams.
Yes, better diagrams. I was thinking about that idea of conceptions of the mean, and it made
Yeah.
me feel like a reviewer too, you know, or sometimes a reviewer three. You know, when you put your work out and then somebody reviews it, and what they want you to do is just use their work more, which
Yeah.
in the scholarly community, you know, is usually just about ego and pride. But I did want to say to the authors, we've done some lovely, Darren and I have drawn some lovely diagrams of different ways you can visualize the mean. We'll let you have them.
Yeah.
Please put them in your book, and median, right?
Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah, again, it's a missed opportunity, and it's like, again,
Mhm.
I don't want to be too critical because
No.
what they do, while kind of like what I would call kind of standard and not best practice for stats, is done better than most examples of the form. So
Yes.
it's like it's taking something that I would have a heavy critique of and doing it much better, but still within that paradigm that you know, arguably we should be shifting away from. I've just gone very blurred.
I have a question
Would
for
you
you.
like?
May I ask it?
Yeah, go for it.
I want to know how you felt about this page.
Um,
So mean absolute
yeah.
deviation,
So
which to me was a surprise. I wasn't expecting it to be in this book, which, let's face it, is about elementary maths.
So again, this is another thing where the research evidence is kind of shining through. So mean absolute deviation is something that is in the Gaze report, which is a big US based report of doing better stats within the context of the Common Core. So it is something that is in the ether within the US education system. So I wasn't surprised to see it there. I think it's some, the idea of it is that it's a measure of variability that is, you know, not as complex as standard deviation. It's a way in, it's an earlier step. So it can be an elementary level measure. In that context, I mean, essentially they just showed you the procedure for making it.
Well,
And
there's a nice little diagram at the bottom.
yeah. Again, well explained, but not really. On average, the spread of Will's test scores is 5 spaces away from the mean in either direction. I mean, that's a factually correct thing, but it doesn't really tell me what does it mean to compare to
Yes.
mean
Yeah.
absolute
Okay.
deviation. What does it tell you about? So there's a lot missing from it, but it was well presented. Again, I mean, that's probably my critique of the whole chapter to some extent. And there is another thing that I hated, which again, I'd be interested to know if you spotted this, which was actually in the fractions chapter. And it was a diagram looking at multiplying mixed numbers.
Yeah.
And used an area model where the scale was not consistent. And so the actual areas of all the pieces didn't relate to each other. And again, I just sort of found that infuriating. It was like, if you're going to use an area model, then you have to kind of make that area model meaningful.
Yes.
Otherwise,
that
it's
attention
misleading.
to detail.
Yeah.
I agree. I think I've written down maybe 10 or 12 times when that happened where I thought there was something to me that was an error, a missed detail, an omission, enough that it really should have been picked up.
Yeah.
So yes, I would agree with that.
Yeah, there was another one I had where I sort of put a note on the text saying this is careless. I can't remember exactly where it was.
Careless is the right word. Yes. Yeah. Oh, you know what I had a problem with? There was a claim made in the measurement section that there are only 3 countries in the world that still use imperial measurement. Now, I'm a pedant, Darren, and there's 2 things that I have an issue with. One, that claim was unsubstantiated by any evidence. I think if you're going to say something like that, you should absolutely say where that's come from. And 2, that's not strictly true. And it's one of those things that people just repeat. There's actually, it's really interesting. It's not binary whether countries use imperial measurement or metric measurement, as we know, living in this great country of ours. And so it's much more interesting than that. And that's the sort of detail that I think I would love for just a little bit more nuance to have been added.
Shall we rush on, because we've been going for an hour now, and we have some more bits to cover, I think, before we wrap up.
Let's talk about things that confused us.
Okay.
Oh wait, no, sorry. Things that word or phrases we enjoyed.
Words or phrases we enjoyed. We've done one of mine, which is the introduction to the data section.
Yes.
I enjoyed that a great deal. My other thing that I noted down that I enjoyed was a very kind of personal thing, just because it tickled something in my brain, which is on page 50, one of the examples. It just has "oh my" as part of the sentence and example.
Oh my.
And the thing is, whenever I hear "oh my," I'm put in mind of George Takei, the guy that played Sulu in Star Trek, going, "oh my." And I can see his face and I can hear him say it, and I very much enjoyed it. Entirely irrelevant to the maths of the book, but yeah.
All right, I have 2, which is naughty of me, but it's okay, I think, because this is a great book. The authors, in their promotion of this book and in the book itself, come down to 2 messages that are linked, and I love it. I will be honest, I think it's really well conceived. We believe deep down that maths makes sense. We believe that everyone can be good at maths, and specifically everyone can be good at maths when it makes sense to them. It's so simple and straightforward, but it so cuts to the heart of what I believe, and so I'd really have to applaud that. And then the second one, you probably noticed this too. They talk about, and this made my heart sing, abstraction in the visual arts as a metaphor for abstraction in mathematics, which is one of the things that I can talk about at length. So they say, by making connections between the physical and visual representations, students provide meaning that can also be connected to symbolic understanding, sometimes referred to as the abstract mode. Lovely. So they say, a studio artist we know once said, when talking about human anatomy, people just think they can make abstract art. They think it's easy to throw paint and shapes on a canvas. A real artist, however, must understand the foundation, the location of the bones, the shapes of the muscles. Only when you know how the form looks at its foundation can you make an abstraction of something like the human form. Now, I will just say, real artist, disgusting language, I don't want that in my life, but what a nice way to think about abstraction, and as an artist it speaks to me as well. So those are the words and phrases that I loved.
It was, again, you can go through this book, the written chunks of text had some just really great conceptualizations of mathematics. And what it is to be a mathematician.
It's also not easy to do when there's 3 of you writing a book, so they've done a great job there. Okay, what confused you?
What confused me? So a few things. Some of it was just about like orders and examples that were picked and stuff. So the pages on equivalent fractions came before multiplying fractions. Do I mean that the other way around? Multiplying fractions came before equivalent fractions. Yes, I do. Sorry, I was reading my note already. The multiplying fractions came before equivalent fractions in the book, which immediately made it a sort of a slightly procedural thing, or have missing information. And so that was a bit like, it was a confusing choice to me. The examples of negative numbers in the chapter 7 intro were really weird, like in terms of how hard you had to think about how those numbers were negative and worked in negative ways. It was like scores in a computer game. And
I wrote exactly a note next to that saying, that's definitely not true of all computer games, and feels like a horrible sort of generalization. But secondly, either use an example that's embedded and explains the example, or don't use it at all.
And it goes back to our thing of like choosing these contexts and the idea of the sort of universal context as being something that's easy to interpret, even if it's not necessarily particularly engaging or inspiring. But here you use some contexts that were very definitely not universal at all, and for me didn't actually add clarity.
More confusing. As a person who plays video games a lot, I sat there thinking, what games have I played where I get a negative score?
Right, and it was a
Not
bit
often.
like there's a sort of a curve of experience here. Like, well, if you don't play any video games, it doesn't really mean anything to you. If you
Yes.
play some video games, you have to play the right ones to be able to interpret that. And if you play loads of video games, you can come up with loads of examples where that isn't actually true. So it doesn't really work for
You
any
said it was a curve,
group.
and then you gestured a line.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking of like ability to interpret that. There's something about it's mid person only if you played the right set of games. I don't know. Anyway, I'm not a stats
Yes,
expert.
that confused
Um,
you. Yes.
yes. How about you?
Ah, here's a biggie. Why the authors chose to use stock images and relatively low quality graphic design choices when they emphasize representation so much.
Yes. And also, and because I had this as well.
Fingers out.
Um,
The fingers out,
the
people.
figures out. And also, we've talked earlier about using evidence from research. Like there are so many good images that could have been pulled out of research-based text that would do some of the
Well,
things they were trying to
yes,
do. Not
but
everywhere in the book, but
speaking as a current editor of a very large academic book, getting permissions for those things is
yeah,
non-trivial. It is hard, and I wish it wasn't this way, but actually I understand it's actually really difficult to lift an image or a diagram from somebody's research paper and use it elsewhere without going through an extraordinary
a
amount of
lengthy
admin.
process.
People who do this, please do something about it.
Yeah,
But yes, there are, I mean, almost every image, and you're talking, a picture of an apple, a stick person, a rabbit, rather than have a graphic designer design those things with mathematical abstraction in mind and to make a book style that looked nice and was lovely
yeah,
to reproduce. They're all stock images with
and it
where they came from written, which takes up a load of sort of text, looks messy, and I just don't understand it.
and it also I think it it makes having the credit being to like a Shutterstock or whatever other stock image,
Mm,
it it makes it look lower quality than it is as
yes,
well.
yes, I
It's
agree.
like printing something on bad paper. Like it doesn't
Mm,
tell you anything about the actual quality of the content, but it does make you think that this is not a higher quality
mm,
product, and that sets up expectations. So by having that, it sort of it puts it in the more self-published space mentally, maybe not going through the same kind of editorial, and that's not the case at all. But it does sort of it sets up some sort of, I guess, um, expectations, or perhaps slightly downgrades the sense of quality of it, which is unfair because
mm,
it's not low quality
no.
by any stretch.
And to that point, I would also say, this is a book about representations. Why would you not hire a graphic designer
Yeah,
whom you work with on every page to
yeah,
get it looking exactly the way you want it to look to bring out the structure of the maths? And
right.
I understand why, right? It costs money, it costs time. But you and I, having had the benefit of working with some great graphic designers, know the massive impact it can have.
Right.
It's huge. And just make things that look pretty, folks. Please do. I want more lovely maths that looks pretty.
Yeah.
I'm begging you, mathematicians work with graphic designers more. Shout
Let's
out to Willow, who we worked with recently, otherwise known as Will. And we have had such a great time working with them, and they've so enhanced our understanding of the maths. Please do it more.
yeah. Let's move things on because this episode is running long at the
Got it.
moment. We've
Got
had a
it.
lot to say. We've had a lot to say. So, yes, something that enlightened you.
I have put, and I think we've agreed on this and we've spoken about it multiple times, some lovely descriptions of mathematics. I don't know that I've ever read a book with better descriptions of what maths is, how it works, and what it's for. An example: multiplication allows you to compute multiple copies of the same sized group without having to add repeatedly. Music. Have you written the same thing?
So, something that enlightened me, really simple thing that just stood out to me over, huh, yeah, that's super obvious. And I kind of know that, but also never just said it. Multiplication is making copies of a quantity. Like,
Now
I
that's
mean,
the definition of poetry, a thing you always knew but never had
yeah,
quite put into
yeah.
words.
I've thought about scaling and area models and all these kind of things, but just tiling as multiplication, which is copies of a quantity kind of thing. But yeah, making copies of a quantity. Yeah, okay, I like that.
Lovely, isn't it? Lovely.
I don't think many people, like lots of people, won't be surprised by that definition of it, but it just made me go, huh. And
That's what you
interesting
want.
that you too. I thought it was a sign of my ignorance, but perhaps it's just a
A
missing
sign
way
of
of
my
thinking
ignorance. Where's the end of that
of our
sentence?
collective ignorance. Yeah. Okay. Um, Final question then before we wrap
Yes.
up and select the next book. If you could ask the author anything, what would it be?
This really bothered me. Let's see if we've got the same issue. There were multiple things. I've mentioned some of them, but this is the big thing that's keeping me awake at night.
Ah,
It genuinely is, and I've been thinking about this book a lot. Page 59, the author's claim. When thinking about 3 times 9 and 9 times 3, it is important to know that even though they have the same product, they are conceptually different. And they use the example of 3 bags of 9 cookies versus 9 bags of 3 cookies. I want to know where this claim comes from, what the evidence is, and how does this square with other things such as properties of multiplication that they talk about and the use of symmetry of the multiplication table that they talk about, because I'm kind of on board and then I'm really not, and I really want to get in. I want to sit these authors down and say, let's talk about this. I'm so
yeah,
interested in it.
yeah. I mean, so again, this is because I had it again. I noticed the same thing, and I was contemplating it for a while about how I felt about it. It's one of those things where that sits right at the heart, I think, of the conceptualizations of mathematics. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so interesting for that, because if you think of mathematics as an abstract, beautiful, universal language that has these properties and axioms and absolute truth and beauty and all that kind of thing, well, quite. For those people listening, Lucy just rolled her eyes heavily.
I did a spectacular example of an eye
Yeah.
roll. I doubt I'll ever be able to better it.
Then it's incorrect. There is no difference between 9 times 3 and 3 times 9 in the abstract. If you are moving from that complete abstract to a conception based on certain models, or a contextual linked piece of maths, then there is a difference.
Now I'm eye rolling at you. I want to talk to the authors about this because it's deep and nuanced. You are now mansplaining it to me.
No, but I think I just think it's like there's loads more than that, but it's just a
Yeah.
fascinating bit like of beliefs about mathematics, which I think we're both interested in,
No,
right?
but I don't hold with that. I do think that 3 times 9 and 9 times 3 are functionally equivalent, but not for the reasons you just gave. So I feel personally attacked by that, and I will come back to that another time. Okay.
The whole other podcast where we could
Yes.
talk about this.
If you could ask the authors anything, what would it be?
So I mean, again, a slightly self-indulgent one, but I would like to sit down and work with them to rewrite their data chapter. Like
Oh, wow.
I would,
Wow.
I know,
Darren rides in on his white horse, everyone.
because
Ask them. The question was ask them.
yes, I would ask them, would you like to sit down and write a data chapter together? Because I think like that visualization stuff that they've brought through the book could do so much with the data, and I want them to do more. And so yeah, I'd just like to
Yeah.
challenge. I mean, the thing that I wrote down was like, how do you feel that the content of your data chapter squares with the introduction that you wrote?
Now you're reviewer 3. That's
Yeah,
that's a very loaded question. Right.
yeah,
Okay.
okay.
I'm handing over to you because you've got the
Yeah,
wheel of loveliness.
I do have the wheel of loveliness. I think we should finish though by saying that like, would we recommend this book to teachers? I think it's come across like absolutely 100% yes.
yes.
Wherever you are in your teaching career,
Yeah.
having a lovely spiral bound book like this with some great mathematical ideas, some really well presented mathematical ideas that you can pick up and flick through and
photocopy and send home to parents and give to students directly and blow up and stick on the wall. Right, all of those things.
And one thing we haven't spoken about, which I did like, and I think you would have liked too, at the start where it talks about how to use this book, and it gives a list of different ways, including working together with other staff members to discuss mathematical ideas and things. The sense of teacher agency, multiple uses, ways to incorporate this into your practice and into your conversations. I think it's a really great book.
Yes. Now you've reminded me, I had one last thing I wanted to come back to. Now this is a very, very nuanced critique, but I'm going to say it because I'm here representing feminism. And we talked at the beginning about whether this book is research backed, research informed. And the thing that I've been trying to put my finger on for the full month that I've been reading this book is there's a slight tone to it that I couldn't quite wrap my head around. And I've been trying to put a word to it. And it finally clicked when I read the author's bios. This book feels very, very slightly feminized in a way that my daughter would call very demure, very mindful. And what I mean by that, not in a good way, is it feels this kind of, there's a little bit of gender coded sort of infantilization to the way that some of this book is talked about, not necessarily the content itself, but some of the discussion around it. And I read the bios of the people who'd written it, and they are well qualified, but there's something about affectionate mother and wife, mum of two amazing Gen Z guys.
Yeah, I did have as a early note that you might have hated their descriptions of themselves.
Using the term Arizona natives in your bio when, I mean, Native Americans in Arizona is one of the most conflict-ridden, politicized histories. I would never use that. I do think there's a bit of a kind of toxic positive femininity to this book that very slightly comes through. This is a mild criticism, but I want to point it out because I'm really, really attuned to this stuff. This kind of, if we make it a bit more for women, then, you know, we don't have to put research in it or whatever it is. And there's just a tiny touch of that I kept picking up on. I want to talk to the authors about it. You know, this is, please come back at me about this. But it feels like a kind of a femininity coach does maths education, and there's pros and cons to doing that, but for me, I really bristle at it. So just wanted to make that point.
Okay. Okay, I mean, this is such a long episode, so let's do the wheel of
it's a great book. It's because it's a great book, Darren.
Right. So let me share my screen with the horrifically coloured wheel of
Shall I sing the jingle? There isn't one. I'm going to make it up. Sure. It's time to pick the new book. What will the new book be? It's time to pick the new book on Darren's Wheel of Fun. That's what we're calling it.
We have Educating Everyone, an introduction to relational inclusion in schools.
Well,
and that is by Anthony Benedict and Alan Braven. So we're on to a general education book, as we've just done a math specific one in the next episode. We will be back in a month's time to read that. Any initial thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I love to talk about inclusion, so I'm very much on board with that. Yes, can't wait.
So I'm trying to get to having absolutely mangled the intro script. I'm trying to find the outro script.
You say, well, it's about that time.
I know. I was just going to. Well, it's about that time. Much as we may want to keep going, and we have been going for a long time, every good party has to end sometime.
And it looks like the crisps, aka our coherent thoughts on this book, have run out. Disagree.
Thank you again for coming to our research party, and we'll see you in the next episode. Goodbye.
Goodbye.